Are you going to hide, Paula?
Well, I'm reading second, so I thought I wouldn't.
Well, it's quite a long piece.
Oh.
Rather longer than it meant to be. I have cut it down. I think one person's all right. Makes it quicker. Well, welcome everybody to our Christmas readings, which, as you know, should have taken place in the Free Church and should have just been, an interlude amongst singing and organ playing from Ian's congregation. But actors never give in. Given the chance to show off, we will. And so we're going to, and we hope you enjoy it. The evening is in two parts, but I don't think we'll need an interval. The first part are individual readings, which we've chosen ourselves, except Roger is reading from what Colin had chosen, but he wasn't well enough to take part. So thank you to Colin for the work he put in, because he sort of cut the dickens, and to Roger for taking over at fairly short notice, and to my fellow cast members who've taken over at very short notice on Zoom. So my piece is called The Gift of the Magi and was written by O. Henry. $1.87. That was all. She had put it aside, 1 cent, and then another, in her careful buying of meat and other food. Della counted it 3 times, $1.87. And the next day would be Christmas. There was nothing to do but fall on the bed and cry. So Della did it. Della finished her crying and cleaned the mark of it from her face. She stood by the window and looked out with no interest. Tomorrow would be Christmas Day, and she had only $1.87 with which to buy Jim a gift. She had spent many happy hours planning something nice for him, something nearly good enough, something almost worth the honor of belonging to him. Suddenly she turned from the window and stood before the looking-glass. Her eyes were shining brightly, but her face had lost its color. Quickly she pulled down her hair and let it fall to its complete length. The James Dillingham Youngs were very proud of 2 things which they owned. One thing was Jim's gold watch. It had once belonged to his father, and long ago it had belonged to his father's father. The other thing was Della's hair. So now Della's beautiful hair fell about her, shining like a falling stream of brown water. It reached below her knees. It almost made itself into a dress for her. And then she put it up on her, this is the hair, then she put it up on her head again, and nervously and quickly. She put on her old brown coat. She put on her old brown hat. With the bright light still in her eyes, she moved quickly out of the door and down to the street. Where she stopped, the sign said, Mrs. Sofroni, hair articles of all kinds. Up to the 2nd floor, Della ran and stopped to get her breath. Mrs. Sofroni, large, too white, cold-eyed, looked at her. Will you buy my hair? Said Della. I buy hair, said Mrs. Sofroni. Take your hat off and let me look at it. Down fell the brown waterfall. $20, said Mrs. Sofroni, lifting the hair to feel its weight. Give it to me quick, said Della. Oh, and the next 2 hours seemed to fly. She was going from one shop to another to find a gift for Jim. She found it at last. It surely had been made for Jim, no one else. It was a gold watch chain, very simply made. It was good enough for the watch. As soon as she saw it, she knew that Jim must have it. She paid $21 for it, and she hurried home with the chain and 87 cents. When Della arrived home, her mind quieted a little. She began to think more reasonably. She started to try to cover the sad marks of what she had done. Within 40 minutes, her head looked a little better. With her short hair, she looked wonderfully like a schoolboy. If Jim doesn't kill me, she said to herself, before he looks at me a second time, he'll say that I look like a girl who sings and dances for money. But what could I do? Oh, what could I do with $1.87? At 7, Jim's dinner was ready for him. Della held the watch chain in her hand and sat near the door where he always entered. She often said little prayers quietly about simple everyday things, and now she said, please, God, make him think I'm still pretty. The door opened and Jim stepped in. He looked very thin. He was not smiling. Poor fellow, he was only 22, with a family to care for. He needed a new coat and he had nothing to cover his cold hands. Jim stopped inside the door. His eyes looked strangely at Della, and there was an expression in them that she could not understand. It filled her with fear. It was not anger, nor surprise, nor anything she had been ready for. He simply looked at her with that strange expression on her face. Della went to him. Jim, dear, she cried, don't look at me like that. I had my hair cut off and sold it. I couldn't live through Christmas without giving you a gift. My hair will grow again. You won't care, will you? My hair grows very fast. It's Christmas, Jim. Let's be happy. You don't know what a beautiful gift I got for you. You've cut off your hair? Said Jim slowly. He seemed to labor to understand what had happened. Cut it off and sold it, said Della. Don't you like me now? I'm me, Jim. I'm the same without my hair. It's sold, I tell you, sold, and God too. It's the night before Christmas, boy. Be good to me because I sold it for you. Maybe the hairs on my head could be counted, she said, but no one could ever count my love for you. Shall we eat dinner, Jim? Jim put his arms round Della. From inside his coat, he took something tied in paper. He threw it on the table. I want you to understand me, Dell, he said. Nothing like a haircut could make me love you any less. But if you'll open that, you may know what I felt when I came in. White fingers pulled off the paper, and then a cry of joy, and then a change to tears. For there lay the combs that Della had seen in a shop window and had loved for a long time. Beautiful combs with jewels perfect for her beautiful hair. She had known they cost too much for her to buy them. She had looked at them without the least hope of owning them. And now they were hers, but her hair was gone. But she held them to her heart and at last was able to look up and say, my hair grows so fast, Jim. And then she jumped up and cried, oh! Jim had not yet seen his beautiful gift. She held it out to him in her open hand. The gold seemed to shine softly, as if it were her own warm and loving spirit. Isn't it perfect, Jim? I hunted all over town to find it. Give me your watch. I want to see how they look together. Jim sat down and smiled. Della, he said, let's put our Christmas gifts away and keep them a while. They're too nice to use now. I sold the watch to get the money to buy the combs. And now I think we should just have dinner. The Magi, as you know, were wise men, wonderfully wise men, who brought gifts to the newborn Christ child. They were the first to give Christmas gifts. Being wise, their gifts were doubtless wise ones. And here I have told you the story of two children who were not wise. Each sold the most valuable thing he owned in order to buy a gift for the other. But let me speak a last word to the wise of these days. Of all who give gifts, these two were the most wise. Of all who give and receive gifts, such as they are the most wise. Everywhere they are the wise ones. They are the Magi.
I'm going to read a poem by Thomas Hardy. In the poem, he refers to a piece of folklore which was current when he was a child. The belief that on Christmas Eve, the oxen kneel down in their stalls in reverence to the Christ child. So, The Oxen by Thomas Hardy. Christmas Eve and 12 of the clock. Now they are all on their knees, an elder said, as we sat in a flock by the embers in hearthside ease. We pictured the meek, mild creatures where they dwelt in their strawy pen, nor did it occur to one of us there to doubt they were kneeling then. So fair a fancy few would weave in these years, yet I feel, if someone said on Christmas Eve, "Come, see the oxen kneel in the lonely barton by yonder coombe our childhood used to know," I should go with him in the gloom, hoping it might be so.
The next reading is by E.V. Lucas, a comic writer who died in 1938, and this is set in the 1930s. Life's Little Difficulties. It consists of 11 letters written to and by the rector of a church concerning Christmas decorations. The first letter, the Reverend Lawrence Lidbetter, to his curate, the Reverend Arthur Starling. Dear Starling, I'm sorry to appear to be running away at this busy season, but a sudden call to London on business leaves me no alternative. I shall be back on Christmas Eve for certain, perhaps before. You must keep an eye on the decorations and see that none of our helpers get out of hand. I have serious doubts as to Miss Green. Yours, L.L. Letter 2. Mrs. Clibborn to the Reverend Lawrence Lidbetter. Dear Rector, I think we've got over the difficulty which we were talking of, Mr. Lulham's red hair and the discord it would make with the crimson decorations. Maggie and Poppy and I have been working like slaves and have put up a beautiful and effectual screen of evergreen, which completely obliterates the keyboard and organist. I think you will be delighted. Mr. Starling approves most cordially. Yours sincerely, Mary Clibborn. Letter 3. Miss Pitt to the Reverend Lawrence Lidbetter. My dear Mr. Lidbetter, we're also sorry you've been called away, a strong guiding hand being never more needed. You will remember that it was arranged that I should have sole charge of the memorial window to Colonel Soper. We settled it just outside the post office on the morning that poor Blades was kicked by the doctor's pony. Well, Miss Lockie now says that Colonel Soper's window belongs to her, and she makes it impossible for me to do anything. I must implore you to write to her putting it right, or the decorations will be ruined. Mr. Starling is kind, but quite useless. Yours sincerely, Virginia Pitt. Letter 4. Miss Lockie to the Reverend Lawrence Lidbetter. My dear Mr. Lidbetter, I'm sorry to have to trouble you in your enforced rest, but the interests of the church must not be neglected. And you ought to know that Miss Pitt not only insists that the decoration of Colonel Soper's window was entrusted to her, but prevents me carrying it out. If you recollect, it was during tea at Mrs. Millstone's that it was arranged that I should be responsible for this window. A telegram to Miss Pitt would put the matter right at once. Dear Mr. Starling is always so nice, but he does lack firmness. Yours sincerely, Mabel Lockie. Letter 5, Mrs. St. John to the Reverend Lawrence Lidbetter. Dear Rector, I wish you would let Miss Green have a line about the decoration of the pulpit. It's no use any of us saying anything to her, since she went to the Slade School and acquired artistic notions. But a word from you would work wonders. What we all feel is that the pulpit should be bright and gay with some cheerful texts on it, a suitable setting for you and your helpful Christmas sermon. But Miss Green's idea is to drape it entirely in black muslin and purple, like a lying-in state. One can do wonders with little cotton wool and a few yards of turkey twill, but she will not understand this. How, with all her impressionist ideas, she got permission to decorate the pulpit at all, I cannot think. There it is, and the sooner she stopped, the better. Poor Mr. Starling drops all the hints he can, but she disregards them all. Yours sincerely, Charlotte St. John. Miss Olive Green to the Reverend Lawrence Lidbetter. Dear Mr. Lidbetter, I'm sure you will like the pulpit. I'm giving it the most careful thought, and there's every promise of a scheme of austere beauty, grave and solemn, and yet just touched with a note of happier fulfillment. For the most part, you will find the decorations quite conventional: holly and evergreens, the terrible cotton wool snow on crimson background. But I'm certain that you will experience a thrill of satisfied surprise when your eyes alight upon the simple gravity of the pulpit's drapery and its flowing, sensuous lines. It's so kind of you to give me this opportunity to realize some of my artistic self. Poor Mr. Starling, who is entirely Victorian in his views of art, has been talking to me about gay colors. But my work is done for you and the few who can understand. Yours sincerely, Olive Green. Letter 7, Mrs. Millstone to the Reverend Lawrence Lidbetter. Dear Rector, just a line to tell you of a delightful device I've hit upon for the decorations. Cotton wool, of course, makes excellent snow, and rice is sometimes used on gum to suggest winter too. But I've discovered that the most perfect illusion of a white rime can be obtained by wetting the leaves and then sprinkling flour on them. I'm going to get all the others to let me finish off everything like that on Christmas Eve. Like varnishing day at the academy, my husband says, when it will all be fresh for Sunday. Mr. Starling, who is proving himself such a dear, is delighted with the scheme. I hope you are well in that dreadful foggy city. Yours sincerely, Ada Millstone. Letter 8, Mrs. Hobbs, charwoman to the Reverend Lawrence Lidbetter. Honoured Sir, I'm writing to you because Hobbs and me despair of getting any justice from the so-called ladies who have been turning the Holy Church of St. Michael and All Angels into a Covent Garden market. To sweep up holly and other green stuff, I don't mind, because I've heard you say year after year that we should all do our best at Christmas to help each other. I always hold that charity and kindness are more than rubies, but when it comes to flour, I say no. If you would believe it, Mrs. Millstone is first watering the holly and the laurel to make it wet, and then sprinkling flour on it to look like hoarfrost. And the mess is something dreadful all over the cushions and carpet. To sweep up ordinary dust, I don't mind, more particularly as it's my paid work and bounden duty. But unless it's made worth my while, Hobbs says I must say no. We draw the line at sweeping up dough. Mr. Starling is very kind, but as Hobbs says, you are the fountainhead. Anyway, awaiting a reply, I am your humble servant, Martha Hobbs. Letter 9, Mrs. Van Sittert to the Reverend Lawrence Lidbetter. Dear Rector, if I'm late with the north windows, you must understand that it's not my fault but Pedder's. He suddenly and most mysteriously adopted an attitude of hostility to his employers, quite in the way one has heard of gardeners doing, and nothing will induce him to cut me any evergreens which he says he cannot spare. The result is that poor Horace and Mr. Starling have to go out with lanterns after Pedder's left the garden and cut what they can and convey it to the church by stealth. I think we shall manage fairly well, but thought you had better know in case the result is not equal to your anticipation. Yours sincerely, Grace Van Sittert. Letter 10, Mr. Lulham, organist, to the Reverend Lawrence Lidbetter. Dear sir, I should be glad to have a line from you authorizing me to insist on the removal of a large screen of evergreens which Mrs. Clibborn and her daughters have erected by the organ. There seems to be an idea that the organ is unsightly, although we've had no complaints hitherto, and the effects of this barrier will be to interfere very seriously with the choral part of the service. Mr. Starling sympathizes with me, but has not taken any steps. Believe me, yours faithfully, Walter Lulham. And the final letter from the Reverend Lawrence Lidbetter to Mrs. Lidbetter. My dearest Harriet, I'm having, as I expected, an awful time with the decorations, and I send you a batch of letters and leave the situation to you. Miss Pitt had better keep the sofa window. Give the Lockie girl one of the autographed copies of my Narrow Path, with a reference underneath my name to the chapter on self-sacrifice, and tell her how sorry I am that there's been a misunderstanding. Mrs. Hobbs must have an extra £0.50, and the flowering must be discreetly discouraged on the ground of waste of food material. Assure Lulham that there will be no barrier, and then tell Mrs. Clibborn that the organist has been given a pledge that nothing should intervene between his music and the congregation. I'm dining with the Lawsons tonight, and we go afterwards to His Majesty's, I think. Your devoted LL.
This is a poem by Rudyard Kipling called Christmas in India, telling us the time of how the expats spent Christmas out in India in the time of the Raj. Dim dawn behind the tamarisks, the sky is saffron yellow, as the women in the village grind the corn. And the parrots seek the riverside, each calling to his fellow, that the day, the staring eastern day, is born. Oh, the white dust on the highway, oh, the stenches in the byway, oh, the clammy flog that hovers ever over earth. And at home they're making merry, 'neath the white and scarlet berry. What part of India's exiles in their mirth? Full day behind the tamarisks, the sky is blue and staring, as the cattle crawl afield beneath the yoke. And they bear one earl of the field path, who is past all hope and caring, to the ghat below the curling wreaths of smoke. Call on Rama going slowly, as ye bear a brother lowly. Call on Rama, he may hear, perhaps, your voice. With our hymn books and our psalters, we appeal to other altars, and today we bid good Christian men rejoice. High noon behind the tamarisks, the sun is hot above us, and at home the Christmas day is breaking one. They will drink our health at dinner, those who tell us how they love us, and forget us till another year be gone. Oh, the toil that knows no breaking, oh, the hameway ceaseless aching, oh, the black dividing sea and alien plain. Youth was cheap, wherefore we sold it. Gold was good, we hoped to hold it, and today we know the fullness of our gain. Grey dusk behind the tamarisks, the parrots fly together, as the sun is sinking slowly over home. And his last ray seems to mock us, shackled in a lifelong tether that dragged us back, however so far we roam. Hard her service, poor her payment, she in ancient tattered raiment. India, she the grim stepmother of our kinds. If a year of life be lent her, if a temple shrine we enter, the door is shut, we may not look behind. Black night behind the tamarisks, the owls begin their chorus, as the conches from the temples scream and bray. With the fruitless years behind us and the hopeless years before us, let us honour, O my brothers, Christmas Day. Call a truce then to our labours, let us feast with friends and neighbours, and be merry as the custom of our caste. For if faint and forced to laughter, and if sadness follow after, we are richer by one mocking Christmas past.
Christmas by John Betjeman. The bells of waiting Advent ring, the tortoise stove is lit again, and lamp oil light across the night has caught the streaks of winter rain in many a stained glass window sheen from Crimson Lake to Hooker's Green. The holly in the windy hedge and round the manor house the yew will soon be stripped to deck the ledge, the altar, font, and arch and pew, so that the villagers can say, the church looks nice on Christmas Day. Provincial public houses blaze and corporation tramcars clang. On lighted tenements I gaze, where paper decorations hang. And bunting in the red town hall says, Merry Christmas to you all. And London shops on Christmas Eve are strung with silver bells and flowers, as hurrying clerks the city leave to pigeon-haunted classic towers. And marble clouds go scudding by the many-steepled London sky. And girls in slacks remember dad, and oafish louts remember mum, and sleepless children's hearts are glad. And Christmas morning bells say, come, even to the shining ones who dwell safe in the Dorchester Hotel. And is it true, this most tremendous tale of all, seen in a stained glass window's hue, a baby in an ox's stall, the maker of the stars and sea, become a child on earth for me? And is it true? For if it is, no loving fingers tying strings around those tissued fripperies, the sweet and silly Christmas things, bath salts and inexpensive scent, and hideous tie so kindly meant. No love that in a family dwells, no caroling in frosty air, nor all the steeple-shaking bells can with this single truth compare, that God was man in Palestine and lives today in bread and wine.
Laurie Lee is to Christmas as holly is to ivy, and this passage is from his memoir, Cider with Rosie. One by one, they came stumbling over the snow, swinging their lanterns over their heads, shouting and coughing horribly. Coming carol barking then? We were the church choir, so no answer was necessary. For a year we had praised the Lord out of key, and as a reward for this service, on top of the outing, we now had the right to visit all the big houses, to sing our carols and collect our tribute. To work them all in meant a 5-mile foot journey over wild and generally snowed up country. So the first thing we did was plan our route. A formality, as the route never changed. All the same, we blew on our fingers and argued. And then we chose our leader. This was not binding, for we all fancied ourselves as leaders. And he who started the night in that position usually trailed home with a bloody nose. 8 of us set out that night. There was Sixpence the tanner, who had never sung in his life. He just worked his mouth in the church. The brothers, Horace and Boney, who were always fighting everybody and always getting the worst of it. Clergy Green, the preaching maniac, Walt the bully, and my 2 brothers. As we went down the lane, other boys from other villages, already about the hills, singing King Wenchler Slash and shouting through the keyholes, Knock on the knocker, ring at the bell, give us a penny for singing so well. They weren't an approved charity as we were, the choir, but competition was in the air. Our first call, as usual, was the house of the squire, and we trooped nervously down the drive with marmalade jars suspended on loops of string as lanterns, and they threw pale gleams on the towering snowdrifts that stood on either side of his drive. A blizzard was blowing, but we were well wrapped up with army puttees on our legs, woolen hats on our heads, and several scarves around our ears. As we approached the big house, across its white, silent lawns, we too grew respectfully silent. The lake nearby was stiff and black, the waterfall frozen and still. We arranged ourselves, shuffling around the big front door, and then knocked and announced the choir. A maid drew the tidings of our arrival away into the echoing distances of the house. And while we waited, we cleared our throats noisily. And then she came back, and the door was left ajar, and we were bidden to begin. We brought no music. The carols were in our heads. Let's give them Wild Shepherds, said Jack. And we began in confusion, plunging into a wreckage of keys, of different words and tempo. But we gathered our strength, and he who sang the loudest took the rest of us with him, and the carol took shape, if not sweetness. This huge stone house with its ivied walls was always a mystery to us. What were those gables, those rooms and attics, those narrow windows veiled by the cedar trees? As we sang Wild Shepherds, we craned our necks, gaping into that lamp-lit hall which we never entered, staring at the muskets and untenanted chairs, the great tapestries furred with dust, until suddenly, on the stairs, we saw the old squire himself standing and listening with his head on one side. He didn't move until we were finished, and then slowly he tottered towards us, dropping 2 coins into our box with a trembling hand. He scratched his name in our book, and he gave each of us a long look with his moist, blind eyes. Then he turned away in silence. And as though released from a spell, we took a few sedate steps and then broke into a run for the gate, and we didn't stop until we were out of the grounds.
I'd like to read another piece now. This is called The True Meaning of Christmas by Rod Liddell, who's a columnist for The Spectator. Each Boxing Day, my mother would take out her pen and pad and estimate the cost price of those Christmas gifts we had, from relatives and family friends, and when the sum fell short of the monetary value for the various gifts she'd bought, she'd write it in her ledger, underlined in red. So Andy, Bertha, Mrs. Bridges, to my mum they were now dead. A pair of socks for 20 pence, a slinky half as dear. I'm telling you this for nothing, son, they're getting out next year. I bought that cow some matchmakers, not just mint but orange too. All I have is ankle socks. I hope she gets the flu. This reckoning became for me the point of Christmas tide, a view which has not altered in the years since my mum died. A special time of nastiness, vindictiveness and greed, and of pigging out on turkey until your insides bleed. The punch shops outside Argus and the sales which never end. Those saccharine injunctions from John Lewis that we just spend on vacuous appurtenances of bright green reindeer carding, and the Channel 4 Christmas address by some deranged jihadi. The drivel on the telly, fake bonhomie, fake cheer, fake love, fake compassion, and those two words you scarcely hear, absent from our Winterval, lest someone take offence. Jesus Christ, oh him, yes, rings the bell, in some half-forgotten sense. And yet as I grow older, I can now discern a reason for this strange misshapen jamboree we call the festive season. For month by month and without fail, we give it our best shot. Then Christmas time reveals to us everything we're not. Everything we could be, should be, but always fall short. In our frailties and our failures. That's the lesson yearly taught. And as the snowman slowly deliquesces on the lawn, the cattle still are lowing, the snail is on the thorn. We are not yet forsaken. Somehow from up above he watches. Amused, appalled, distraught, who knows? Yet still we have his love.
And now, our last piece, we will read some extracts from A Christmas Carol by Charles Dickens. First, we will join the spirit of Christmas present leading Scrooge through the streets of London on Christmas morning.
They went on invisible as they had been before into the suburbs of the town. It was a remarkable quality of the ghost that, notwithstanding his gigantic size, he could accommodate himself to any place with ease, and that he stood beneath a low roof quite as gracefully and like a supernatural creature as it was possible he could have done in any lofty hall. And perhaps it was the pleasure the good spirit had in showing off this power of his, or else it was his own kind, generous, hearty nature and sympathy with all poor men that led him straight to Scrooge's clerks. For there he went and took Scrooge with him, holding to his robe. And on the threshold of the door the spirit smiled and stopped to bless Bob Cratchit's dwelling.
Then up rose Mrs. Cratchit, Cratchit's wife, dressed out but poorly in a twice-turned gown, but brave in ribbons, which are cheap and make a goodly show for sixpence. And she laid the cloth, assisted by Belinda Cratchit, second of her daughters, also brave in ribbons, while Master Peter Cratchit plunged a fork into the saucepan of potatoes, and getting the corners of his monstrous shirt collar into his mouth, rejoiced to find himself so gallantly attired, and yearned to show his linen in the fashionable parks.
And now the two smaller Cratchits, boy and girl, came tearing in, screaming that outside the baker's they had smelt the goose and known it for their own, and basking in luxurious thoughts of sage and onion, these two young Cratchits danced about the table and exalted Master Peter Cratchit to the skies, while he, not proud, although his collar's nearly choking him, blew the fire until the slow potatoes, bubbling up, knocked loudly at the saucepan lid to be let out and peeled.
Whatever has ever got your precious father then? Said Mrs. Cratchit, and your brother Tiny Tim. And Martha warn't as late last Christmas Day by half an hour.
Here's Martha, mother, cried the two young Cratchits. Hurrah, there's such a goose, Martha.
Why, bless your heart alive, my dear, how late you are, kissing her a dozen times and taking off her shawl and bonnet for her with officious zeal.
We're a deal of work to finish up last night, replied the girl, and had to clear away this morning, mother.
Well, never mind, so long as you are come. Sit ye down before the fire, my dear, and have a warm. Lord bless you.
No, there's father coming.
And how did little Tim behave? Asked Mrs. Cratchit.
As good as gold and better. Somehow he gets thoughtful, sitting by himself so much, and thinks the strangest things you ever heard. He told me coming home that he hoped the people saw him in the church, because he was a cripple, and it might be pleasant to them to remember upon Christmas Day who made lame beggars walk and blind men see. Bob's voice was tremulous when he told them this, and trembled more when he said that Tiny Tim was growing strong and hearty. His active little crutch was heard upon the floor, and back came Tiny Tim before another word was spoken, escorted by his brother and sister to his stall before the fire. And while Bob, turning up his cuffs as, if poor fellow, they were capable of being made more shabby, compounded some hot mixture in a jug with gin and lemons, and stirred it round and put it on the hob to simmer. Master Peter and the two obsequious young Cratchits went to fetch the goose, with which they soon returned in high procession.
Such a bustle ensued that you might have thought a goose was the rarest of all birds. Mrs. Cratchit made the gravy, ready beforehand in a little saucepan, hissing hot. Master Peter mashed the potatoes with incredible vigour. Miss Belinda sweetened up the apple sauce. Martha dusted the hot plates. Bob took Tiny Tim beside him in a tiny corner at the table. The two young Cratchits set chairs for everybody, not forgetting themselves, and mounting guard upon their posts, crammed spoons into their mouths, lest they should shriek for goose before their turn came to be helped. At last the dishes were set on, and grace was said. It was succeeded by a breathless pause, as Mrs. Cratchit, looking slowly all along the carving knife, prepared to plunge it in the breast. But when she did, and when the long-expected gush of stuffing issued forth, one murmur of delight arose all round the board, and even Tiny Tim, excited by the two young Cratchits, beat on the table with the handle of his knife and feebly cried,
Hurrah!
There never was such a goose. Bob said he didn't believe there ever was such a goose cooked. Its tenderness and flavour, size and cheapness were the themes of universal admiration. Eked out by apple sauce and mashed potatoes, it was a sufficient dinner for the whole family.
Indeed, as Mrs. Cratchit said with great delight, surveying one small atom of a bone upon the dish, they hadn't ate it all at last.
Yet every one had had enough, and the youngest Cratchits in particular were steeped in sage and onion to the eyebrows. But now, the plates being changed by Miss Belinda, Mrs. Cratchit left the room alone, too nervous to bear witnesses, to take the pudding up and bring it in.
Suppose it should not be done enough? Suppose it should break in turning out? Suppose somebody should have got over the wall of the backyard and stolen it while we were merry with the goose? A supposition at which the two young Cratchits became livid. All sorts of horrors were supposed. Hello! A great deal of steam! The pudding was out of the copper. In half a minute, Mrs. Cratchit entered, flushed but smiling proudly, with the pudding, like a speckled cannonball, so hard and firm, blazing in half a quartern of ignited brandy, and bedight with Christmas holly stuck into the top.
Oh, what a wonderful pudding, Bob Cratchit said, and calmly too, that he regarded as the greatest success achieved by Mrs. Cratchit since their marriage.
Mrs. Cratchit said that now the weight was off her mind, she would confess that she had had her doubts about the quantity of flour.
Everybody had something to say about it, but nobody said or thought it was at all a small pudding for a large family. It would have been flat heresy to do so. Any Cratchit would have blushed to hint at such a thing.
At last, the dinner was all done. The cloth was cleared, the hearth swept, and the fire made up. The compound in the jug being tasted and considered perfect, Apples and oranges were put upon the table, and a shovel full of chestnuts on the fire. Then all the Cratchit family drew round the hearth in what Bob Cratchit called a circle, meaning half a one. And at Bob Cratchit's elbow stood the family display of glass. 2 tumblers and a custard cup without a handle. These held the hot stuff from the jug, however, as well as golden goblets would have done. And Bob served it out with beaming looks, while the chestnuts on the fire spluttered and crackled noisily. Then Bob proposed.
A Merry Christmas to us all, my dears. God bless us.
which all the family re-echoed.
God bless us, everyone, said Tiny Tim, the last of all. Roger, you're muted.
Sorry. He sat very close to his father's side upon his little stool. Bob held his withered little hand as if he loved the child and wished to keep him by his side and dreaded that he might be taken from him. Spirit, said Scrooge, with an interest he'd never felt before, tell me if Tiny Tim will live.
I see a vacant seat, replied the ghost, in the poor chimney corner, and a crutch without an owner carefully preserved. If these shadows remain unaltered by the future, the child will die.
No, no. Oh, no, kind spirit. Say he will be spared.
If these shadows remain unaltered by the future, none other of my race will find him here. What then? If he be like to die, he had better do it and decrease the surplus population.
Scrooge hung his head to hear his own words quoted by the spirit, and was overcome with penitence and grief, and trembling cast his eyes upon the ground.
Man, if man you be in heart, forbear that wicked cant until you have discovered what the surplus is and where it is. It may be that in the sight of heaven you are more worthless and less fit to live than millions like this poor man's child. Oh God, to hear the insect on the leaf pronouncing on too much life among his hungry brothers and sisters in the dust.
Later, Scrooge at home in his bedroom hears the bell strike 12. As the last stroke ceased to vibrate, he beheld a solemn phantom, draped and hooded, coming like a mist along the ground towards him. It was shrouded in a deep black garment, which concealed its head, its face, its form, and left nothing of it visible, save one outstretched hand.
Ghost of the future, I fear you more than any spectre I've seen. But as I know your purpose is to do me good, and as I hope to live to be another man from what I was, I'm prepared to bear you company, and to do it with a thankful heart. Will you not speak to me?
It gave him no reply. The hand was pointed straight before them.
Lead on, lead on. The night is waning fast, and it's precious time to me, I know. Lead on, spirit. They went into an obscure part of the town where Scrooge had never penetrated before, although he recognized its situation and its bad repute. The ways were foul and narrow, the shops and houses wretched, the people half naked, drunken, slipshod, ugly. Alleyways and archways, like so many cesspools, disgorged their offences of smell and dirt and life upon the straggling streets, and the whole quarter reeked with crime, with filth and misery.
The ghost conducted him through several streets familiar to his feet, and as they went along, Scrooge looked here and there to find himself, but nowhere was he to be seen. They entered poor Bob Cratchit's house, the dwelling he had visited before, and found the mother and the children seated round the fire. Quiet, very quiet. The noisy little Cratchits were as still as statues in one corner, and sat looking up at Peter, who had a book before him. The mother and her daughters were engaged in sewing, but surely they were very quiet.
She laid her work upon the table and put her hand up to her face. The colour hurts my eyes. They're better now again. It makes them weak by candlelight, and I wouldn't show weak eyes to your father when he comes home for all the world. It must be near his time.
Past it, rather, Peter answered, shutting up his book. But I think he has walked a little slower than he used these last few evenings, Mother.
I've known him walk with Tiny Tim upon his shoulder, very fast indeed.
And so have I, often.
But he was very light to carry, and his father loved him so that it was no trouble, no trouble. And there is your father at the door.
She hurried out to meet him, and Bob in his comforter, he had need of it, poor fellow, came in. His tea was ready for him on the hob, and they all tried who should help him to it most. Then the two young Cratchits got upon his knees, and laid each child a little cheek against his face, as if they said, "Don't mind it, father, don't be grieved." He broke down all at once. He couldn't help it. If he could have helped it, he and his child would have been further apart than perhaps they were.
Mrs. Cratchit kissed him. His daughters kissed him. The two young Cratchits kissed him. And Peter and himself shook hands.
Good Spirit, your nature intercedes for me and pities me. Assure me that I yet may change these shadows you've shown me by an altered life. I will honour Christmas in my heart and try and keep it all the year. I will live in the past, the present, and the future. The future of all three shall strive within me. I will not shut out the lessons that they teach.
Running to the window, he opened it and put out his head. No fog, no mist, clear, bright, jovial, stirring cold, cold piping for the blood to dance to, golden sunlight, heavenly sky, sweet fresh air, merry bells. Oh, glorious, glorious.
What's today? He called down to a boy in Sunday clothes, who perhaps had loitered in to look about him.
Eh?
What's today, my fine fellow?
Today? Why,
It's Christmas Day. I haven't missed it. The spirits have done it all in one night. They can do anything they like. Of course they can. Of course they can. Hello, my fine fellow. Do you know the poulterers in the next street but one on the corner?
I should hope.
hope I did.
Do you know whether they've sold the prize turkey that was hanging up there? Not the little prize turkey, the big one.
The one as big as me?
What a delightful boy. It's a pleasure to talk to him. Yes, my buck.
It's hanging there now.
It is? Go and buy it.
Walker?
No, I'm in earnest. Go and buy it and tell them to bring it in here, that I may give them the direction where to take it. Come back with the man and I'll give you a shilling. Come back with him in less than 5 minutes and I'll give you half a crown.
The boy was off like a shot. He must have had a steady hand at a trigger who could have got a shot off half as fast.
I'll send it to Bob Cratchit's. He shan't know who sends it. It's twice the size of Tiny Tim. Joe Miller never made such a joke as sending it to Bob's will be.
But he was early at the office next morning. Oh, he was early there. If he could only be there first and catch Bob Cratchit coming late. That was the thing he had set his heart upon, And he did it. Yes, he did. The clock struck 9, no Bob. 1/4 past, no Bob. He was full 18 minutes and a half behind his time. Scrooge sat with his door wide open that he might see him coming into the tank. His hat was off before he opened the door, his comforter too. He was on his stool in a jiffy, driving away with his pen as if he were trying to overtake 9 o'clock.
Hello. What do you mean by coming here at this time of day?
I'm very sorry, sir, said Bob. I am behind my time.
You are? Yes, I think you are. Step this way, sir, if you please.
It's only once a year, sir. It shall not be repeated. I was making rather merry yesterday, sir.
Now, I'll tell you what, my friend. I'm not going to stand this sort of thing any longer. And therefore, I'm about to raise your salary. A Merry Christmas, Bob. A merrier Christmas, Bob, my good fellow, than I've given you for many a year. I'll raise your salary and endeavour to assist your struggling family. And we will discuss your affairs this very afternoon over a Christmas bowl of smoking bishop, Bob. Make up the fires and buy another coal scuttle before you dot another I, Bob Cratchit.
Scrooge was better than his word. He did it all and infinitely more. And to Tiny Tim, who did not die, he was a second father. He became as good a friend, as good a master, as good a man as the good old city knew, or any other good old city, town, or borough in the good old world. Some people laughed to see the alteration in him, but he let them laugh and little heeded them. His own heart laughed, and that was quite enough for him. He had no further intercourse with spirits, but lived upon the total abstinence principle ever afterwards. And it was always said of him that he knew how to keep Christmas well, if any man alive possessed the knowledge. May that be truly said of us, and all of us. And so, as Tiny Tim observed, God bless us,
everyone.
everyone. Right.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, everyone reading. Thank you, Diana, for organising. Well done, everyone.
Very much. So that's your lot. So Merry Christmas.
Thank you. Happy Christmas, everybody.
Merry Christmas, everyone.
Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas.
Thank you.
Well done. Well
Thanks.
done. Bye.
Love your virtual background, Marilyn.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
I haven't changed it from yesterday. I was.
I liked your first story, Diana.
Yes, I was sorry to discover how long it was because I had to cut out a lot of the description and comments so to leave you with the story. But I'd remembered that from years ago, so I'm glad you liked it.
Very good. The
Oh,
whole lot
very
was
good.
very engaging.
Thank you.